Aberdeen, Scotland is an old city which has over the years been transformed from a medieval settlement into the modern city we see today, thanks to some massive engineering projects. The evidence of this construction can be seen easily throughout the city's centre, with the most well known of all constructions being Aberdeen's main thoroughfare, Union Street. Named after the Union with Ireland Act of 1800, Union Street runs from west to east throughout the city, with a large portion of the road laid upon the giant granite single-span Union Street Bridge, which was built in the early 1800s and is the largest of its kind in the world today. The Union Street Bridge was built along with Union Street, with the intention being to span the Denburn Valley, creating a grand, modern entrance into Aberdeen from the south, crossing the glacial gorge and a small river called the Denburn, which ran down the middle of the valley from Kingswells to the harbour. Once the bridge was built, the area between Adelphi and Diamond Street could be joined, which created the almost mile-long Union Street we see today. The area at which Union Street extends originally traversed a network of medieval streets and hills, including the very large St Catherine's Hill. The city's Union Street, Rosemount, Bridge Street and many other areas were all built using a series of granite and brick viaduct systems, literally bridging up and over the city's medieval streets, while at the same time flattening and building over St Catherine's Hill. As we neared the late 19th century, the Denburn was covered over to make way for a train yard and the northbound line to Inverness. Around 20 years later, Westminster passed the Aberdeen Extension and Improvement Act, which planned on modernising the area around the city, adding in up-to-date roads and systems for sewage, clean water and electricity. I decided to take my search to the internet, where I discovered more rumours, but at the same time came across some great sources. For example, one website I discovered, the Doric Columns, is a website which has a ton of information about the city. For instance, Carnegie's Brae, a large tunnel that runs below Union Street. These days the tunnels are mostly used for storage and nightclubs. Carnegie's Brae also leads to more tunnels, which up until the early 1800s were one of Aberdeen's old slum areas called Petachie Side. Petachie Side was flattened, then covered over in the building of Union Street's viaduct arches. What was Petachie Side now resides under Market Street in a large gated tunnel which is used mainly for storage. The topic of what may lie beneath Aberdeen's surface goes as far back to the dawn of the modern city, with stories of smugglers' tunnels and streets hidden underground. If I told you there was once a subway that ran through the centre of Aberdeen, I wouldn't blame you for not believing me, but in the late 1800s there was a subway underneath a large portion of Aberdeen's city centre, with its design inspired by that of the Parisian metro system. I found out that this tunnel did exist, and it was called the Aberdeen Electric Cable Subway. Although, it was not a subway for people, it was for the transmission of electricity. The Aberdeen Electric Cable Subway was built in the early 19th century as part of the Aberdeen Extension and Improvement Act. The centre of Aberdeen was at this point transformed into the city we know now, a feat which seems mind-blowing with the slow pace of urban transformation today. The Aberdeen Electric Corporation decided that the best way to supply electricity to Aberdeen's electric tramways and the constantly expanding West End, avoiding the use of ugly above-ground cables, was to go underground. And so the subway plans were submitted as part of the Aberdeen Extension and Improvement Act. This way the project could be completed and delivered using money from government. Before the work could start though, planners and engineers had to work out where the tunnel would fit into the city centre. The starting point for the tunnel was always going to be Milburn Street, at the Milburn power station, as this is where the electricity was generated. The tunnel would then travel for 690 metres, following the line up Crown Street. Shafts up to 30 feet in depth had to be excavated so the engineers could place both the subway and a new sewer main within the same excavation. Near the top of Crown Street, at the connection to one of the city's oldest thoroughfares, Windmill Brae, the tunnel takes a left turn onto Langstone Place, where it then travels along Aberdeen's ancient road to the south, before joining on to Justice Mill Lane. After travelling for another 620 metres, the tunnel terminates at the junction between Holborn Street and Justice Mill Lane. It is worth mentioning that the stories of the subway's design being inspired by the Parisian metro are true, although not all the tunnel was built in this style. While the subway area beneath Langstone Road and Justice Mill Lane were designed using the Parisian inspiration, with its clean and curvaceous design, the area that ran beneath Crown Street was designed and built using very basic materials, such as the basics of rough bricks and cement. The termination point of the subway is marked with a large ventilation shaft that was used to pull warm, clean air through the tunnel when it was originally in use. The shaft is now adorned with what looks like a large, decorative Art Nouveau monument that was designed by the Karen Steelworks, who also produced the steelworks for many of our red pillar postboxes. Below this much ignored work of art is the end of the cable subway. It houses a large chamber which takes up most of the under road area between the historic Glen Tanner Bar and the foundry across the road. This room, and as mentioned, the whole stretch of tunnel between Holborn Street and Crown Street, was designed with a very different and contrasting style, with the Crown Street length looking very barren with rough brickwork and hard edges, while the Langstone Justice Mill area was designed to not only be functional but to look stunning by way of its curved, horseshoe shape and polished brickwork. When building the subway system, the council had a great sense of foresight, as they did with the sewer plans, and designed the tunnel so that it could continue to supply the city with a constant supply of electricity as it grew into the future. Sadly, but unsurprisingly, there are no entrances into the subway which are publicly available. Today, the tunnel is owned and operated by the electricity supplier SSE. I have tried to reach out to SSE, but I could not get any access to the tunnel. As I neared the end of my probe into the subway, and while I had learned a lot, I still needed closure on one topic. Do any of the entrances to this tunnel still exist? Over the years, something I have noticed around the Justice Mill Lane areas were these strange manhole covers that exist nowhere else in the city, following only the subway route. When I was looking at the tunnel plans, I read that there were manhole entrances on both Academy and Affleck Street. So I grabbed a cameraman and we went looking. At first it seemed like there was nothing but regular manholes, but just as we were about to leave the area, my cameraman spotted it. The manhole! Not only did he find an entrance to the subway, but he also confirmed a theory I had about those unique manholes on Justice Mill Lane. They are entrances to the tunnel. Although I had confirmed my theories about the manhole covers being entrances into the tunnel, I still wanted to know where the subway starts. After looking around the area, I could only find one SSE building on Portland Street, which matched the historical data I had discovered, but this did not seem right, as I know the subway began in the Milburn Power Station, not Portland Street. I think this theory came about as it is known that the tunnel exists, so logically there has to be an entrance. And as the only SSE owned building in the area, everyone seems to point to this. But rather than accept this theory, I decided to go investigate for myself. Just as I got to the building on Portland Street, some SSE workmen were arriving at the area. Off camera, I managed to chat with the workmen, some of whom had worked in the area for decades. They were able to tell me what they knew about the tunnel, as well as confirming my theory about the entrance to the tunnel. It is not on Portland Street. The entrance to the tunnel was in fact exactly where it should be, and where it always was, on Milburn Street. The workmen had told me that when the power station was flattened to make way for flats, there was no real way to get rid of the tunnel, so it was hidden behind many locked doors, hidden from all but SSE's workmen. Just how much of this tunnel is used now is a mystery to me. What I do now know though is that this subway does exist, and that on my journey to find the truth about this tunnel, I have learned a lot about the city I have spent my life in. Aberdeen's subterranean world. In the future, I would love to see Aberdeen City celebrate and protect its huge engineering projects, as over the last 300 years, Aberdeen has been flattened and rebuilt a few times, with whole areas such as Patachi Side lost to time. It is my hope that this trend stops, and while we pave the roads to the future, we make sure to at the same time conserve Aberdeen's civil engineering history, as it is some of the finest Victorian engineering in the UK.